Yeah. I think some TV shows are better than others for kids.
That seems true too. Yeah.
Like Bluey just seems like the most psychologically kind of healthy pro adaptation show.
So to get started, hi, welcome, Dr. Daniel Winarick. Thank you for being here. Today we're going to be speaking to all sorts of things in the context of parenting, of psychoanalytic principles and parenting principles and how they overlap or not. And we have a unique take, quite obviously, from you. So thank you again for being here. It's exciting to have somebody with a lived experience of how these worlds amalgamate or map onto one another. So to get started, if you could maybe introduce yourself or what it is you wish to
Yeah,
speak to about this, that'd be wonderful.
sure. I'm Daniel Winarick. I'm a psychologist in New York City. I'm in private practice, and I used to teach a lot at Adelphi, LIU in Brooklyn, and Queens College, CUNY. Graduate, undergraduate, mainly like research methods. But I was born and raised on the Upper West Side, and both of my parents are psychoanalysts and psychologists.
Which is super cool and unique and definitely something to talk about. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't, growing up, I wasn't sure it was so unique because all of their friends were also psychoanalysts and
Mm.
social workers or psychoanalysts and psychiatrists or psychoanalysts and psychologists, and kind of grew up, thinking, that of course psychoanalysis was true. This is a helpful way to think about the world
Sure.
and its problems and like one's, inner experience. So for college, I went to WashU in St. Louis, and I just kind of automatically majored in psychology. Just seemed like what I needed to do. And
Obligated.
They were not too, fond of Freud or psychoanalysis. So I just listened to you and Mark, discuss sort of the state of psychoanalysis. And, that's sort of been a long story about its marginalization from mainstream academia. And I certainly have my own view of that because it was sort of personal for me on one level because it's also like how my parents made a living. It's how they made sense of the world. So for it to be kind of debunked and trashed, it was offensive. But I also loved psychology and I loved science. I kind of got obsessed with this niche within academic psychology of, I guess, psychoanalytic friendly researchers who wanted to show that Freud was still relevant. These ideas were not bullshit, actually. And there was as much empirical evidence for them as for other ideas in psychology, which, if many of them are in fact the same psychoanalytic ideas themselves, but just relabeled. So that sort of dynamic is what motivated my entire interest in psychology from undergrad through my PhD program through teaching, which was sort of the interface and bridging the gap between psychodynamic theory, therapy, psychoanalysis, and mainstream psychiatry and psychology. I guess what I remember most was this intro to cognitive science class where this guy was asking us to categorize what was pseudoscience and what was not pseudoscience. And so he's like naming a bunch of stuff. He like names astrology and like that's easy. And then he's like psychoanalysis. And I was like science. And it was like the most humiliating raising my hand ever because I was shut down immediately. I did terribly in that class because I not a fan of the guy. It gave me an appreciation for a rigorous, hard nosed, very experimental behaviorist approach to science, which I don't think is at all anathema to studying psychoanalysis or psychodynamic psychology, actually. As
Right.
in,
Not at all.
no, it's not any more so than studying any other type of psychology.
So what's interesting again, and obviously elaborate where you feel most compelled or safe, what have you, your stake in it, as you said, was there was a, personal stake as much as there was a philosophical stake in not only elaborating or extrapolating or celebrating, psychoanalytic theory, thinking, principles,
Yeah,
ontology. You
absolutely.
also had your family, your culture, your
Not,
being.
right. Not just that. I obviously was put in psychoanalytic therapy, as an adolescent.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess not obviously, but I guess a lot of children of analysts
Sure. Yeah.
are in some sort of analytic therapy. So, I mean, that was precious to me and totally life transformative and the template for my technique as a therapist now, even, and sort of the basis of most of my learning about like what to do as a therapist and how to think about patients and how to integrate practical clinical work with psychoanalytic theory. And I loved my analyst, so it was an insult.
How did you manage negotiating that where, it was personal and professional?
So this was back in like 2000, and I think neuropsychoanalysis just started. Like they just had a journal.
Yeah.
And so I brought it up to my intro to cognitive science professor, and he was like convinced that I had made this thing up and that I was
Wow.
talking neurolinguistics. So I tried to bring up my ideas in ways that I thought made sense to professors as they were relevant in class and stuff. And it turned out that the chair of the psychology department was this guy Randy Larson, who was the founder of evolutionary psychology, basically. And he was like on the down low, kind of a psychodynamically oriented person.
Everybody's closeted that
And
way.
he had like published this study in the Journal of the American Psychoanalytic Association on process research and psychoanalysis. And his research was on what he called like the automatic vigilance detection system. So he was researching implicit processing, which is academic psychology speak for unconscious processing. So, but they study it just by response time. So he was showing depressed people negative and positive words and seeing if they're depressed, if you have a different reaction time to, I don't even know what the theory behind it was, but the idea is that there'd be some sort of unconscious processing that's congruent with your emotional personality.
Which to me, again, as an analyst or somebody very keen, as we previously discussed before recording, on neuropsych or neuropsychoanalysis,
Yeah.
seems quite obvious, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it seems psychoanalytic.
Yeah, of course.
And so that's what, is sort of by chance. I had emailed him for a research assistantship, not knowing what his research was or that he was interested in psychodynamic theory. And it turned out that he totally understood that he was relabeling Freudian defense
Right.
mechanisms.
They've been relabeled now, what, 11 times?
Called it an automatic vigilance detection system, I guess.
I think the more syllables that we've now in the year 2025, how many times the wheel has been reinvented, and the more syllables you add to the label, the more scientific it becomes, even though we're just speaking to projection or rationalization or whatever ego defense or filtration system.
Yeah.
Quite obviously the same thing, just with more words.
Yeah, and so that's what I did research as an undergrad. I did these research assistantships on unconscious processing and semantic priming, basically all this stuff that's studied in cognitive psychology in terms of how stuff you're not aware of impacts your perception,
Sure.
and that you can even have feelings that you're not aware of and that can impact your thinking.
I mean, again, I'm so pleased that you attended today. It's so funny how obvious this is and this isn't disparaging. I mean, it's just, if you're into the subject, if you're
Yeah,
passionate about it, it's so clear that, I think of the homeodynamic principles. Right.
as in my next research assistantship was in this cognitive psych lab. They were doing this study on priming in aging, and I was like, maybe it's, think about and studying personality variables too. And they're like, great idea. We'll add the neo, which I was like, oh God, that's the worst thing you could do, but whatever. And they were like, this was great. They were like, thought it was such an important contribution. I'm like, that was very obvious.
Right. It's, again, I mean, the fact that these disciplines are siloed, as Mark and I were
No
talking about,
silo.
it's such
Yeah.
a problem. I mean, it's so clear if you're modest enough, if you're humble enough, whatever the word is. I'm repeating myself with all these episodes, but the idea that, of course, you're primed, of course, the homeodynamic principles that give rise to a thought, feeling, or behavior are operating beneath the liminal threshold of consciousness. So if you're in again, it's like, what's an obvious example is you're hungry. I always use that example with patients, and you don't feel that you're hungry until it breaches a certain threshold into
Yeah.
consciousness. And also it has to be, it's a feeling, it's sort of an affective or self state even. And then it's rendered as a thought. But the bottom up organization of that is just very clear cut in the neurophysiology. And it's
Yeah.
isn't, that handshake between the body and mind it's not, I don't understand. Is it controversial? Maybe you know better than me. It shouldn't be controversial.
No, it's that people don't have the kind of abstract semantic kind of networks in their own minds to be
Right.
able to like link these kind of ideas, and they just have their own
Or their own ego,
distant
their own ego
definitions. Their
invested.
own ego,
Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole, subtext to the marginalization of psychoanalysis. Is what happened to the egos.
Right. So can you speak to put you in the hot seat a little bit, but can you speak to what it was like for you given your upbringing and then pursuing
Yeah,
academically?
I mean, it was exciting because the stakes were high. And so I wrote in the Wikipedia page for psychoanalysis, trying to make it sound more valid.
Right.
It's 2 or 3 sentences that are still there that I'm like,
Let's
wrote
go.
Yeah. It's like, I forget, it was like many, cognitive psychologists now acknowledge the mind is not a black box, something implicit process. But so I was like hungry for knowledge. I was surprised, happy to find that people had similar thinking about academic psychology as I did, which is like, are you kidding me? First of all, this is relevant for like a 10-year-old going to day camp. The concepts are so,
Separation anxiety, homesickness, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just not, I mean, they're important, right? But it's like barely touches the surface of what you think of when you think of a psychology in terms of academic psychology. So it was getting used to what psychology was, understanding that that there was a different definition of science than what I had thought existed, and that, academic psychology operated, at least at WashU, within this logical positivist framework. And if you weren't in that framework, it was like dog shit. But I think I was sensitive, maybe other people wouldn't have perceived such hostility, but there definitely was. It enabled me to to figure out my area of academic psychology that got me excited, and to find professors who were thoughtful and stay away from ones who weren't. My favorite course was this seminar, Current Controversies in Psychology. And we did like a whole week or two on the psychodynamic subliminal priming research. I don't know if you know it, but it was like the first implicit process study was flashing, I guess, the sentence "mommy and me are one" to people on a tiktoscope. I can't pronounce it.
Right. The
Yeah,
fraction of a second with the
yeah,
black.
fraction of
Yeah.
a second, and
Yeah.
seeing, if it made people happier.
Depends on their relationship with their mothers, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I mean, it was, but yeah, so I got, I was like involved in lively intellectual debates about it, both alone and with professors. And it, I think, probably made me an interesting applicant for graduates. I would hope.
Well, I would assume so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it steered which schools I applied to. I applied to programs in clinical psych that, I mean, I really wanted research heavy programs, but I also wanted psychoanalytic theory. And I didn't know anything about practice. I was just graduating college. But so I knew, because my parents were in the field, I kind of knew about every program. And I was able to be mentored by someone at John Jay, Bill Gottheimer, who was the director of clinical training there until just this year. He retired. I was told at WashU, they're like, if you want to go to grad school, you got to find a professor who you think you have similar research interests with, and ask if you can do research for them. And so there aren't that many academic psychologists and PhD doctoral programs in clinical psychology who have anything related to psychoanalytic theory in their research interest bio. There's like 5, at least at the time. And Bill was one of them. He was interested in schizophrenia and psychoanalysis. And I didn't know that was a student of my mom's a long time ago. But
Wow.
yeah. And knew all the players and institutions. But he also was an academic psychologist who, I don't think his parents were analysts. I think he just had a very meaningful experience as a patient in psychoanalysis. Going through psychology, he heard the same criticism that I did and was motivated by the same desire to kind of avenge psychoanalysis as I was, or at least have it be appreciated.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
So if we fast forward a little bit, then how is it informing your practice today? Or what's it like? Or what are you focused on today? Or before we jump into the parenting stuff, as we were discussing prior,
Yeah.
is this something you're still fighting for, in essence?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of us have been in a somewhat active measure on social media
Sure.
for 5 years now, and I think it's been pretty successful actually. Just seeing whatever publications come out, there does seem to be an increasing prevalence in scholarly research journals with papers with psychoanalytic titles and about psychoanalytic topics explicitly. So I do that. I haven't written a blog for Psychology Today in a while. That's a common theme in my blog. Seeing if my mentor from graduate school, Bob Bornstein, wants to publish or do anything with this data set he has of the Rorschach oral dependency scale, which is implicit measure of the desire to be fed, metaphorically, so to speak, but like relying on other people, wanting to be
Right.
taken care of, and self-report measures of detachment. So I wanted to know if people who said they're detached have unconscious desire for, food to be fed.
Right. Orality, a level of
Right.
orality in
Yeah,
there.
exactly. I mean, I think that gets to the core of the validity of this schizoid personality construct, which is like they may appear detached, but subconsciously, unconsciously, consciously, it may be a different story than what's readily available.
Isn't that the difference? And correct me where I'm wrong. The claim, and this is again maybe a failure of the DSM, but I don't remember exactly the difference between the avoidant structure versus the schizoid, and they claim, right,
Well,
that
the DSM just ignores the
the
existence of
etiology.
any
Yeah,
dynamics of there being any implicit dependency needs or lack thereof, either way.
I feel like I was taught. I feel like I was taught, and this is why I'm saying I don't remember exactly, but I think why I'm saying it's wrong was that one was an acknowledgement that avoidance still had the desire for connection and attachment, and then
But
that
yeah,
the
right.
schizoid didn't. And I was
Yeah,
like, how is that? What
that
do?
was that's my dissertation. I was like, this is
Okay,
a stereotype. I want to see if that's, true.
it's a pretty ugly stereotype.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
it's like a neurological deficit.
right. Like, what do you mean they don't want? Like, how do you know? Like,
They
has
lack
self-report?
they lack the capacity for
Okay,
relationships
right.
neurobiologically.
Yeah, like this organic disease, this neurological lesion that
Right.
precludes attachment style.
Yeah.
Okay, you know,
Yeah. It's not credible.
yeah, not valid. As Mark was saying, with those four measures of understanding disease, it does really matter.
Yeah, clinically with my work, I've always been pretty close to evidence-based practice in terms of like thinking it's important to know what it is and to be able to justify myself. Right, it's my
No,
son
I understand.
and car that he drives around, and she's like a biker gang person.
I'm jealous. I would like to play with them right now.
Yeah, they're cute. Yeah, so I do use like CBT techniques, and when the person, in sort of like in furthering the therapeutic alliance almost. It's like for the sake of, I don't know, when I do stuff like that, I think about it, the process of it psychoanalytically. So like, what does it mean that I'm providing this structure, and why is that important for this person? Almost like going through that routine, is probably more curative than the actual content of any CBT
Right.
activity itself.
Well, it's the tool itself is there's this iatrogenic variable, right? The tool itself provides an opportunity for exploration and discovery versus the sort of manifest detail of the tool or the content held within the tool, may or may not float or sink, but the reality that you're providing something can be quite meaningful. At the same time, you're in that tension. The classical analyst would say, well, you don't want to gratify or collude with the defense.
Right.
At the same time, you don't want to impinge on the frame.
Right.
And
But,
so,
a
yeah,
relational analyst would say, like, sometimes
yeah,
you do want to gratify
right.
events and you want to do so thoughtfully,
Right.
so
So
that
as long as there's room for exploration. Right.
right. So I guess I'm left being aware that there's a million ways to sort of approach anything or just to rationalize anything clinically.
Right. Right. It's challenging. So, given the fact that your children are present,
Yes.
I think that's an appropriate parlay into.
Boundaries.
It's wonderful. It's good. We have live action and an audience. So we spoke prior to pressing the record button in regards to how this maps onto parenting, and I thought it was a useful topic as we were texting as well a week ago, because it is. And I joked with you, it's spicy right now. Parenting books are like a hot thing. And the joke, as a mentor told me, is like they solved parenting, they'd no longer be writing books. And so we all know that it's complicated. We all know there isn't a guidebook. But I am very curious that you have this experience, both, of course, as a parent and also the child of analysts. Do you ever consider the unique perspective you have, given your academic trajectory as well as your ontological trajectory, and familial one, in the problems of parenting today, or what have you?
I mean, good,
I know it's a big
very
question.
great question and setup.
Set you. I apologize if I set you up.
I don't know where to start exactly. I mean,
Well, I can. Do you want me to tee you
yeah,
off a little bit? So
yeah.
I think the reason I was excited to speak to you about this, and I wasn't sure if you were going to bring up your own history, which I'm super, again, grateful that you did, is that in my experience, speaking informally, I mean, not speaking to any specific patients, is just that the anxiety right now, to me, seems particularly high. I don't think it's necessarily higher or lower than other eras or other seasons of
I mean,
parenting or
like
other
in terms of
generations.
overprotectiveness and
Right, all that kind of stuff. And also the screen anxiety and the social media anxiety and the either the over pathologization of children or the under pathologizing and the over
oh,
pathologizing.
sure. No, no, absolutely. I mean, there's a dialectic, I think, between what probably like a psychoanalyst or psychologist would say to do parenting wise and maybe what they do as a parent.
Right.
It's not always the same thing. I think
That
that's
sure isn't.
probably true for me and my kids and my parents and me.
And me.
But aspirationally, I think enmeshment is obviously kind of an issue these days, I think. And for better or worse, I mean, I don't mean it like literally enmeshment in a clinical sense. I'm being like a little bit sarcastic or something with it. I mean, I'm still very close to my parents. I have the same job as them basically and see them all the time. And, that may be a common pattern for people these days. But that's different than I think what we're seeing now, I guess, since COVID. I mean, what I've noticed in my practice, I do a lot of testing and I do therapy. So I've seen kids like at all ages having various effects, at different points in their life. They missed school because of COVID. Some were freshmen, some were juniors, some were in middle school. And I think for some number of people, people got habituated to social isolation, with social media and just how rewarding dopamine wise everything is on screens and video games. At least in my practice, I see a lot of males with kind of schizoid pattern by virtue of, I think, habituation to social isolation. And what does that have to do with parenting? I think parents are just in a difficult position in how to help their kids, and I think there is a tendency to be very worried. I guess I would encourage parents to to encourage their kids to get in more trouble. Basically,
It's the John Haidt word, right?
yeah,
It's the reality is, to echo a bunch of your interpretations and sentiments. It's the reality. I don't treat as many kids, depending on the state of my practice, but the reality is that treating adult children, which we all are,
you're right.
is that anxiety seems to have certainly been exacerbated by COVID, and then the convenience, like you said, of the dopaminergic qualities of everything being mediated by screens, and the convenience again of that isolation being not negatively charged per se, because you have the screen to facilitate some sort of simulation
Yeah,
of
I mean,
connection.
video games, it seems like, are really intellectually stimulating, and
Right.
that's a part of the problem. Is like it can really kind of satisfy all these needs that people
Yeah.
have for intellectual stimulation, for social interaction, for achievement motivation, power motivation, and then you spend hours and hours and like you haven't really done it.
Right. That's the challenge. And I sympathize again with, as you were saying, with the parents, as a parent myself, the anxiety of how do you negotiate screen time? How do you relate to it? How do you help a child still feel safe to be with themselves, to learn, right, to regulate without the
Yeah,
need for the screen to do so? The metric I always
I'm
use just to
guilty
provide,
of giving out the screen like it's,
of course, yeah.
candy. I mean,
Yeah, I mean it is.
take this, please.
Shut up. The challenge is that the metric I was taught and always used is that once it becomes a real internalized object, it's like a regulatory object where the child uses it in a way to neutralize or anesthetize anything that provokes anxiety. And then it's that positive feedback loop back to sort of the behaviorism, quite obviously, and conditioning where they need it because without it, it's producing the negative charge. So then they're dependent on it, and then it feeds that loop, and then the parent doesn't want to deal with it,
Right.
and then they continue to feed it as well, leaving the child without knowing, and the parent not wanting to deal. Well intended, of course, not saying the parent's neglectful of anything.
I think there's also a level of guilt on the parents' part and a knowing that this is not good,
Right, right. And we all feel that, especially in the parent then
which makes it
control
hard
the
to
thing.
face,
Right.
do
And,
anything
and
about
so they control the things, exactly. And they control the things they can and don't control the things they can't. So they say, oh, I'll put a timer on. You get your iPad for this amount of time. You get the movie for this Disney Plus for this amount of time, whatever it is. But the reality is, of course, as we always said, the psychoanalytic perspective of understanding the process, the dynamic, the
it. Yeah.
dialectic, the liveliness of what's going on. And, going outside and playing is a necessary part. Think back to, we spoke to Panksepp's stuff before, of the drive for play is a real substantiated evolutionary scientific drive. You need to practice life to be able to engage in life. And so if it's all practiced through video games or through a screen, or through watching somebody else in that passivity, you're not accomplishing the same multimodal learning that provides you those capacities to live later in life successfully.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just, it's a challenge that everyone has to deal with every day with technology.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I think some TV shows are better than others for kids.
That seems true too. Yeah.
Like Bluey just seems like the most psychologically kind of healthy pro adaptation show.
But this is why I wanted to speak to you today.
Yeah.
So, in all sincerity, what is it about Bluey? Because now we got some juice here, right? We got some meat on the
Yeah.
bone. What is it about Bluey versus another show in your experience professionally and also
I think,
personally?
yeah, no, it's a good question. I'm happy to answer it. I think Bluey, I mean, for one, it models, I think, very good parenting behaviors by both parents, and it normalizes parenting. And it really, it's a lesson in what Winnicott would call like how to be a good enough parent or
Right.
mother. It's like, it also, the characters have flaws, like the dad is not like happy to be doing stuff all the time, and it's playful in a way that makes you appreciate play and having little kids. So
Right. Knowing the compromise and speaking to my own
yeah, and
analysis as well.
it teaches good lessons too. I mean,
Right. The compromise of autonomy as the parent, where the weekend, the weather's been terrible around us in the tri state area for a while. Every weekend it's raining. And so, how do you negotiate that compromise of your own autonomy at the same time, still have the bandwidth and ability to care and
yeah,
play when you're so frustrated
that's
that you're
what.
stuck
Yeah,
inside?
right. That's how do you have any mental space really
Right.
to do any?
So to put you on the hot seat again, this is good because we'll get people to tell us to fuck off. It'll be interesting. What's a bad show? Do you have,
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, it's like a confession how much I know about TV.
you have young kids?
Yeah. I mean, I like Paw Patrol. I have certainly nothing negative to say about that. I think Rubble and Crew, the spin-off, is a little weak, but
I don't know the spinoff. Is it
it's like Rubble and Crew. He's sort of got this foster family, so it's just a little heavy-handed on I think some of the kind of values, which I agree with, like
yeah?
teaching.
Oh, so you're saying it's like
People have foster families. That's true.
it's is it contrived? Is it
It's a little bit,
ham-fisted?
yeah, it's a little tricky.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see. I thought you were going to go in the direction of like Rebel ends up a communist sympathizer.
Yeah, but like, that's the direction it's going. uh, there's a lot of haters of Coco Melon.
Yes, that one.
I can
Oh,
see
please go ahead.
why. I have no beef with the haters, that's for sure.
I have beef.
With the haters of Coco Melon?
I have beef with the haters of Coco
Fair
Melon.
enough.
And the soapbox is very shallow because I don't know enough. So I'll employ my own clinical humility here.
Yeah.
As far as I understand, as colleagues and peers or friends have shown me, parents, the pop psychology, social media influencers have gotten their hands on Coco Melon. In my understanding, so bear with me, that they're claiming that it's purposefully contrived and generated with a slower cadence, a
Yeah.
slower frame per second,
Like a dick.
yeah, brighter colors and all these things
I
that
think it's true.
I think it's true too.
So does Mickey.
But is that true?
Yeah, definitely the saturation.
Oh, I thought you were saying Mickey Mouse was a hater, and I was like, I need to
No,
get him on the
no, just the
podcast.
colors are
Okay,
same.
I'll call Mickey Mouse's people and see if he'll join an episode of What the Fuck Is Life. Disney might get mad, but I agree with all of it. But where I get frustrated, back to the topic at the top of our meeting today, our episode, is that they use the scientific jargon, which upsets me, to justify their beliefs, which already are fine. I don't disagree with, but I think they're employing and diluting the scientific validity of things by using words like hijacks the brain. It rewires the brain of the child. It makes them addicted. It gives them a dopamine shot.
No, it just
And that
makes,
kind of stuff really,
right. It's
it dilutes what it, go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, it feels good to their brains to watch,
Right.
you know.
Right.
You
But
don't
we don't have to
feel so
use
dramatic.
the right. And they're also the people who are saying this stuff, and the little videos I've been shown on Instagram or TikTok of the person behind the green screen, and then it's Coco behind them, and they're going, your child is being, their brain is being hijacked or polluted or
Right.
co-opted by the
But
creator. And it's like, well, okay, and then they
like
use the words like
this
dopamine.
one parent who I think I don't even know her name or identity, just that there was a parent who was very vocal and anti Coco Melon, was also very pro these Tonys, which are these like little toys that come with
Right,
a
the singing.
speaker.
I know what Tonys
Yeah,
are.
the
Yeah,
tone,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The singing
So
box. Yeah.
right, and so there's no screen. It's like a audiobook or a
Okay.
podcast for
Right.
kids.
Yeah.
And I have to be honest, those Tonys are very strong in quality content. I mean, they have this classic stories, and then there's usually some improvised seeming story afterwards that's like
Right.
related. The messages are pretty much you're gonna life is like a long journey. You're gonna get lost and you're gonna feel bad, and you have to keep going to succeed.
Right.
And I think if
Which Tony is? I'm curious to which Tony is that?
that, I mean, the little engine that could.
Oh, I need that one.
Yeah,
Okay, I
that's
like that. I like that
that's a
lesson.
good one.
I have a lot of
And I
the
love
Rapunzels and Moanas.
the places you go. The Dr. Seuss book.
Yeah, yeah, that's
It's
a good
like
book too.
it's very negativistic. It's like, you're gonna get
Borderline
fall
reality
down,
pessimism.
you're gonna get depressed. It's gonna be hard to get undepressed, you know, you'll barely make it.
Yeah, we need the 4-year-old and staring at the sky in the existential crisis, going, "What the fuck is life?
But
What's the
it's good.
meaning?"
Like that's the partly the anecdote to the anxiety. It's to like,
Yeah, yeah.
be like,
They're gonna do a Sartre Tony.
yeah, right. That's serious.
Maybe this is a good business idea. Maybe we could put our episode. I'll make a 3D printout of you, and
Yeah,
then it'll go on the Tony box. It'll be this conversation.
yeah, yeah. Maybe that's the future of therapy.
Yeah, yeah. That's a whole nother conversation. But it is troubling. I sympathize. I still feel that anxiety myself as a parent, and for parents and for kids, of how to negotiate that when
Yeah,
who said it recently? I forget the author, and I apologize for that. It was something to the effect of, and this has been said before. This is almost like a Malcolm Gladwell thing, but it's been said many, many times. Signal and noise type of stuff. There's so much noise, and negotiating all that in service, like you said, of the constructive developmental principles and procedures and processes that are necessary for children and parents alike. It's very hard to find out sort of what's good, quote unquote, or good enough to be Winnicottian, and what is actually getting in the way of that. Because something
yeah,
could be so seductive and feel in simulation that it's good. I mean, even be veiled, or there's this patina, the shine of goodness, that it's healthy psychologically, but it's really not. and how do you equip yourself? I, again, as a parent myself, you're nervous and saying, well, this, how do you trust your gut, and how do you feel safe, and how do you, facilitate like your open play at the same time,
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like a psychoanalytic insight, but actually, like, depression is good, actually, to experience as a kid, and it's good to be sad.
Well, can you elaborate on that for all the, for our
Yeah,
25
like,
listeners that are
you
scared
know,
shitless of that
if you have a
sentence?
child, obviously not like severely depressed or it's not good, but you want to have gone through some trials and tribulations without mom and dad making it all better right away, so that you have experience seeing that you can survive negative emotional experience.
Yeah, exactly. It's well said. And that, I think, is rarer and rarer nowadays, anecdotally.
Totally.
And that the interventions are sooner and sooner, in my experience with young children.
Yeah. I
And
think the
we don't,
competitiveness is really wild too. I mean, just at least Upper West Side, Upper East Side kind of parenting in terms.
and right. And so they don't have a chance to fail because they're
They don't
extensions,
have
they're
time to do
idealized.
anything.
Right. They're extended, they're idealized objects, they're love objects of the parent. They don't have time to be a self. They don't have time to fail. They don't have time to learn who the fuck they are. And then they're lost if they're, if they don't get into the Ivy League, or they're just a great K-8 school
Yeah,
on the Upper West Side or Upper East Side.
yeah, the
It's
preschool.
right. Or the preschool. Yeah. And there's no room for development at all. There's no room for play. There's no room for improvisation. There's no room for spontaneity. All the things that are,
Yeah.
again, well,
I mean, I fell in love with my son's preschool for being completely play-based. They didn't teach any.
but as far as I understand, he had to be the best at play to get
He had
into
to
that.
be, now he can make friends with anyone easily. It's like, but that's just what you want, someone.
Who could stack the most blocks, and then that's the person who gets into school.
Yeah, right. Or, he figured out how to hold a pencil the other day, like a better grip than me out of nowhere. So,
Yeah, mazel tov.
yeah, thank you. Really fucked kids up because a lot of parents literally did not have their kids socializing.
Yeah, yeah.
Just wearing masks or seeing masks all the
It
time.
really,
Literally language development,
yeah.
all of it.
Anything that's contingent upon socializing.
Well, like a school, it's like every year is cumulative. So to miss like 1.5 or 2 years when you're in 8th or 9th grade, I mean,
yeah, it's really.
and I don't like that hasn't been taken seriously in any real.
No, it really hasn't, and it's a shame, obviously, that like you, as you said earlier, when it happened is obviously vital in its impact, but it's not appreciated irrespective of when. So happening to the 2-year-old matters greatly, but happening to the 7-year-old and happening to the 14-year-old also matters greatly. Or I have patients that it happened when they were in college and then they missed out on the majority of the college experience.
Right.
And that it's a huge thing that's just we're not talking about.
Yeah. No, I mean, for sure. But even just things like foreign language or math, you have to go to the next level. You have to pass the year before.
Right.
So to be in 9th grade and to then you should be in whatever, like calculus, but you're then going into geometry or something. The educational system never addressed that. So, I mean, I saw it when I was teaching as an adjunct, curving entire cohorts to pass them.
Just to move them through, because that's our solution is
right.
Who has the time, and I don't, it's nobody's to blame entirely. We're all to blame, because how do you invest the time, the money? How do you delay years of schooling and then hold people back? And then
these people have transcripts that, they're expected to be able to do what seems they've accomplished.
Yeah. It's some talk about needing for study. We know it's almost to say the study will be helpful, but we know the answers and that the solution doesn't exist. It's only going to catch up with everybody at some point in their lives, respectively. And then they're going to have to attend to that in their 20s or 30s or some point, or maybe never, but it's not, can't, do it at 14 to 16 unless the parents have the means, or, I don't know.
Yeah, even that, I mean, like, you're 16 or 17, like half of like school is like, you're becoming an adult. Those are like the main years where you're
right.
I mean, not everyone is for those years, but generally there's a lot of like independent leaps that are made.
And that was a huge, yeah, that's a whole nother influence variable, that's really not brought about into the conversation outside of, people much rather speak to screens and screen time than speak to the reality of the developmental delay.
Yeah.
Especially because some of those delays are more insidious as the kid gets older. And they just think it's part of the personality of being a teenager or a latency stage or whatever, or even a young adult in treating the arrest, the failure to launch, arrested development in the 25-year-old.
Yeah. What do you do with what do you do with that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you're facilitating development and again, Winnicottian, you're being the good enough parent through the transference and helping somebody become themselves, but you're trying to help them catch up.
But often the communication is limited, or it's, there's not much going on. Some patients might be so depressed or disinterested or have lacked the experience of talking about their problems to anyone, that they just do it in fact.
Yeah. And trying to incentivize it, right? Trying to help them feel safe to change, right? Feel safe to get to know themselves, feel safe to understand.
Try to, join them and, their interests.
And it's very hard. And especially when there's such a incentive to stay the same and not feel through the pain of, what's been ignored.
Right. Which is the main psychoanalytic insight, which is like, there's no easy fix. Whatever's behind the desire for screens needs to be understood and felt in order for anyone to move on in a real way.
It's such a good metaphor. It's such a good metaphor because what's behind the desire, as you said, for the screens is what the parent feels most ill-equipped about to understand and interpret and feel through. Because if the parent themselves is also anxious and cognitively, there's a collapse of investigation or collapse of possibility of investigation, then they themselves are using the screen also defensively, and that's not talked about. So when I treat a parent or a family,
meaning like an automatic, like no screen.
Right. So they split. Exactly. So they split. The most common defense is the split.
Solve all their problems.
Right. There's no screen. You only get the screen when you're sick, or you only get the screen on the weekends, or you only get the screen after you eat your vegetables. And it's just split and treated without any dialectic, without any tension and understanding that it's serving the parent as much as the child.
Yeah.
And it's a huge, that's again, it's a huge problem. I can't get over, which shouldn't surprise me given my own pathology and my own treatment and everything I've learned, that splitting is just so, obviously it's so convenient. It takes so much less effort and bandwidth to do so.
Parents taking things personally from their kids.
Sure.
Maybe that's always been the case and it was very advisable, but it's just, you see it as a clinician, I guess.
Yeah. Now it's maybe now it's more, I don't know.
Like, you just take what the kid says as though they're like a peer and you react to it. Like,
because it speaks to maybe our generation or our poor development. Yeah. If you have a, fragile ego, or you're porous in some way, or your own your own personality constellation or structure, and the child becomes
thing. It's like this, come on, like the person is like,
4 years old.
4 years old.
It's something.
They're not trying to screw you up.
We do have to wrap up for today. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it. Yeah, we'll do it again. We have to continue the conversation. I'm excited to talk more about Bluey.
Yeah.
And the conversation about screens and the parenting stuff, because people, before we write our book together on how to do parenting properly in the psychoanalytic way, people don't know, and having to as always, very analytic, having to tolerate ambivalence and ambiguity as a part of life, especially when raising something as dynamic as a child, makes people anxious. So they split. Split.
Now, next time I'll have to give you some anecdotes for my own analysis.
Yes,
Child being parented by a Freudian.
All right, take care.
Okay, bye.
All right, thanks again. Bye.